Get your worthless ass away from this house before we throw you out with the trash. Harlan Crow kicked Caleb Thorne's family photo across the dirt. Your mama's gone. This dump is ours now. Nobody cares that you came crawling back. Caleb did not move. That was my mother's house. Crow lifted his pipe. Was. You hear me? UAS. Behind him, two men ripped another section from the porch while neighbors watched from windows. Crow looked Caleb up and down. Look at you, coming back too late and standing in this wreck like there's still a home left to save. Caleb bent down and picked up the photo. Get off my mother's property, now. Crow stepped closer. You really think one washed-up veteran can stop 20 of us? The whole block went silent. Crow had no idea Caleb was a Navy SEAL trained to destroy violent men before they could react. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the next story is one you don't want to miss. The rideshare pulled away with the soft hiss of hybrid tires on cracked asphalt. Caleb Thorne stood at the corner of Maple Row, his green duffel bag heavy on his shoulder, wearing faded jeans and a plain gray t-shirt that stretched tight across his chest. The civilian clothes felt strange after years in uniform. Everything felt strange. He had not been home in a long time. The last time he walked this street, his mother Rosalind had been alive, waving from the front porch of the small blue house she had owned for decades. The house where she had raised him alone, the house where she had died while he was deployed on a classified mission he could never talk about. Caleb took 5 steps toward the familiar address and stopped dead. The house was destroyed. The roof gaped open like a wound, exposing broken rafters to the gray sky. The front porch hung at a sick angle, its white railing smashed into splinters. The front door dangled from one hinge. Furniture, photographs, and pieces of his mother's life lay scattered across the brown lawn like garbage. And standing in the middle of it all was a crowd of men in white tank tops and dirty jeans. They held baseball bats, tire irons, and crowbars. They were laughing. Caleb counted 23 of them. His mind automatically mapped their positions, weapons, and body language. The tall one with the buzzed head was the leader. The others deferred to him, looked to him for approval before speaking. The leader noticed Caleb staring and grinned wide, showing crooked teeth. "You lost, soldier boy," the man called out loud enough for the whole block to hear. "This ain't your neighborhood anymore." Caleb walked closer. His boots made no sound on the sidewalk. His hands stayed loose at his sides. "Who did this?" His voice was calm, conversational. The leader laughed harder. "Name's Harlan Crow, and I did exactly what the city told me to do. This place was condemned, brother. We're just helping it along." Behind the curtains of neighboring houses, Caleb saw faces watching. Old Mrs. Hattie Cole from next door, the Reyes family from across the street, people who had known him since he was a boy, people who had loved his mother. They looked scared. Crow stepped forward, spinning a metal pipe in his hand like a baton. "Property's already been transferred. Paperwork's been filed, and you got no legal claim here. So I suggest you grab your little bag and keep walking before you get hurt." Caleb noticed the dark sedan parked 50 yards up the street. A woman sat behind the wheel holding something that looked like a phone, but was aimed in his direction. Recording. He noticed the way 3 of Crow's men kept shifting their weight from foot to foot. Nervous. Inexperienced. He noticed the 2 men flanking the group who stood differently. Military bearing. These 2 had training. He noticed the narrow gaps between the gang members, the broken porch steps that would trip anyone moving backward, the pile of debris that would scatter under running feet. Caleb noticed everything, but all he said was, "This was my mother's house." Crow's grin turned ugly, was being the important word. "Your mama ain't here to protect it anymore, is she?" Several gang members chuckled. One of them, a skinny kid with face tattoos, stepped forward and kicked at a picture frame lying in the dirt. It was Caleb's graduation photo from boot camp, the glass already cracked. "Oops," the kid said, laughing. "Butterfingers." The frame slid across the concrete, coming to rest against a pile of broken roof shingles. Caleb looked at his ruined photograph. Then he looked at his mother's destroyed house. Then he looked at the men who thought this was funny. Slowly, deliberately, he set his duffel bag down on the sidewalk. The laughter died. Caleb walked to the broken frame and bent down to pick it up. Caleb straightened up, the broken photograph in his hands. The glass had spiderwebbed across his younger face, but his mother's handwriting was still visible on the back. "My son, my hero." Crow stepped closer, pipe tapping against his palm. "You deaf or just stupid? I told you to move along. This is private property." Caleb said quietly, "You're trespassing." "Private property?" Crow threw back his head and laughed. "Boy, you've been gone too long. This whole block belongs to Progress now. Your mama's little house was standing in the way of something bigger, something better." The gang spread out in a loose semicircle around Caleb. 23 men total. Most held improvised weapons. Boards, pipes, crowbars. The two with military bearing carried nothing in their hands, but their shoulders told Caleb they knew how to use them. "City inspector came by months ago," Crow continued, enjoying his audience. "Found all kinds of violations, structural damage, safety hazards. Real, dangerous place to live, you understand? So the city condemned it. Paperwork's all legal and proper." Caleb tucked the photograph into his jacket pocket. "Who signed the transfer?" "You did, soldier boy. Caleb Thorne, right there in black and white. Signed it over to Harbor Gate Development weeks ago." Crow's grin stretched wider. Funny thing about signatures. Sometimes people forget what they signed when they were thinking about other things. Weeks earlier, Caleb had been in a classified location, completing a mission he could not discuss with his own mother, let alone a real estate company. The signature was a lie, but proving it would take lawyers and time his mother's house did not have. Behind the curtains, more faces appeared. Mrs. Cole pressed her phone against the window, recording. The Reyes family's teenager had his camera pointed through the front door. Even old Mr. Otis Grant from 3 houses down stood on his porch, watching. Caleb gave them all one last look. People who had watched him grow up. People who had brought casseroles when his mother got sick. People who were too afraid to help, but brave enough to witness. "I'm going to ask once," Caleb said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Everyone get off my mother's property, now!" Crow's laughter turned harsh. "Or what? You gonna fight all of us? This ain't the movies, boy. This is real life, and in real life, 23 beats 1 every single time." Caleb looked at each man surrounding him, the nervous ones, the eager ones, the smart ones already backing toward the street. "You're right," Caleb said. "This isn't the movies." He stepped backward toward the broken porch, drawing them closer together. "In the movies, I'd warn you that I'm dangerous. I'd tell you about my training. I'd give you some speech about what happens when you mess with a Navy SEAL." The skinny kid with face tattoos laughed and raised a 2x4 over his head. "Navy SEAL? This fool thinks he's—" Caleb moved. The kid never saw the hand that twisted his wrist, never felt the precise pressure that made his fingers release the board, never understood how he ended up face first in the dirt with his arm pinned behind his back in less than 2 seconds. "But this isn't the movies," Caleb finished, stepping over the moaning kid. "So I didn't warn you." Crow's face went cold. "Take him down. All of you. Now." They rushed him. Caleb stepped backward onto the broken porch steps, using the uneven ground to his advantage. The first attacker stumbled on the loose boards. Caleb caught his pipe mid-swing, reversed it, and drove the handle into the man's solar plexus. He folded like wet paper. The second and third came together. Caleb grabbed the dangling porch railing, ripped it free, and swept both men's legs. They crashed into each other, tangling in the debris. The fourth man swung a crowbar at Caleb's head. Caleb ducked under it, drove his shoulder into the attacker's midsection, and used his momentum to slam him into the broken front door. The wood splintered. The man did not get up. More rushed in. Caleb flowed between them like water, using the narrow walkway to force them to attack single file. Each movement was precise, economical, devastating. A palm strike to disable, an elbow to drop, a leg sweep to humiliate. No killing, no permanent damage. Just overwhelming surgical violence that left grown men groaning in the dirt. Phone cameras captured everything. The methodical way Caleb dismantled trained fighters. The calm expression on his face as boards and pipes swung at his head. The eerie silence he maintained while bodies hit the ground around him. Crow backed toward his car, pipe forgotten in his hand. For the first time, he looked afraid. "What are you?" he whispered. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Caleb stood in the center of his mother's ruined yard, surrounded by 21 groaning men and shattered wood. His civilian clothes were dusty, but not torn. His breathing was steady. His hands were unclenched. The sirens screamed closer. Police cruisers flooded Maple Road like an invasion force. Red and blue lights strobed across Caleb's damaged house, painting the stunned faces of neighbors who pressed against their windows. Engines rumbled, radios crackled, boots hit asphalt. Caleb stayed perfectly still in the center of the yard, surrounded by groaning bodies and splintered wood. His hands remained visible at his sides. His breathing stayed controlled. After years in hostile territory, he knew how to survive when armed authority arrived. The first officers out of their vehicles raised weapons, shouting commands that overlapped into chaos. "Hands up! Get down! Nobody move!" Caleb complied with everything simultaneously, somehow managing to look non-threatening, while 21 gang members writhed in the dirt around him. The visual was impossible to misinterpret. One man standing, 21 down. No weapons in Caleb's hands. Captain Amara Quinn stepped out of the lead cruiser. She was compact, sharp-eyed, wearing the kind of authority that came from years of seeing through lies. Her gaze swept the scene methodically. The scattered pipes and boards, the broken porch, the furniture thrown across the yard like garbage. She walked closer, studying Caleb's posture, the positioning of the bodies, the damage patterns on the house. "Captain," Crow struggled to his feet, blood running from his nose. "That man is dangerous. He attacked us. We were just doing city work." Quinn ignored him. She looked at the phone still recording in neighbors' hands, then at the weapons scattered in the dirt. All of them belonged to Crow's men. None near Caleb. A slim black woman in a city inspector's jacket approached from across the street. She carried a tablet and moved with the confidence of someone who dealt with official business every day. "Captain Quinn, I'm Celine Vargas, city building inspector. I called this in." Quinn turned. "You witnessed the incident?" "I recorded it." Celine held up her phone. "These men were trespassing on private property, destroying belongings, making threats. When the homeowner arrived, they attacked him with weapons. That's a lie." Crow spat blood into the dirt. "We had city orders to clear this condemned property." Celine's voice stayed level. "Show me the paperwork." Crow opened his mouth, then closed it. Quinn looked at the nearest gang member, who was sitting up slowly, holding his ribs. "You armed?" The man nodded toward a crowbar 3 feet away. "Him?" She pointed at Caleb. No weapons visible, Captain, the officer confirmed. Quinn studied Caleb for a long moment. There was something about his stillness, his perfect posture, the way he tracked every officer's position without moving his head. Military. High-level military. "Cuff them," she ordered, pointing at Crow's crew. "Start with the loud one. This is ridiculous." Crow screamed as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "That psycho could have killed us all. He's trained to kill." "But he didn't kill you," Caleb observed. "Interesting choice for a psycho." Officers moved through the yard, collecting weapons, photographing evidence, taking statements from neighbors who had suddenly found their voices. The crowd grew bolder as Crow's men were loaded into cruisers. An elderly woman approached Caleb hesitantly. "Thank you," she whispered. "They've been terrorizing this block for months." A young father nodded agreement. "My kids were afraid to play outside." More neighbors emerged, speaking quietly, gratefully. The fear that had kept them silent was lifting with each gang member who disappeared into a police car. Caleb felt something he had not expected. Hope. Maybe the system could work. Maybe justice did not require him to operate outside the law. Celine moved closer as the crowd dispersed. "Don't relax yet," she said quietly. Caleb studied her face. "What do you mean? This wasn't random vandalism." Celine's voice dropped. "Multiple homes on Maple Row have been condemned in recent months. Every owner who refused to sell had their property declared unsafe within weeks." The hope in Caleb's chest cooled. "My mother's house?" "Was on the list before she died." Celine pulled a manila folder from her jacket. "They've been planning this for months." She opened the folder and handed Caleb a property transfer document. His mother's address was typed at the top. Below it, a signature that looked exactly like his own handwriting. Caleb stared at the paper. According to the document, he had sold his mother's house to Atlantic Shore Holdings, LLC, weeks earlier. Weeks earlier, he had been on a classified mission thousands of miles away. Inside Celine's parked car, across from the ruined house, Caleb studied city documents, while police towed away Crow's men. The interior of Celine's Honda smelled like coffee and old paper. Caleb sat in the passenger seat, the property transfer documents spread across his lap, like evidence of a crime he could not fully understand yet. Through the windshield, he watched officers load the last of Crow's crew into a police transport van. "Look at the signature carefully," Celine said, leaning over to point at the bottom of the page. "It's perfect. Too perfect." Caleb examined his own forged name. The handwriting matched his style exactly. The pressure, the loops, even the way he crossed his T's. Someone had studied his signature extensively. "Weeks ago I was—" Caleb stopped himself. The mission details were classified. "I was overseas. Military operation. I couldn't have signed this. Can you prove that?" "My commanding officer could. The Navy could. But they won't discuss classified deployments in civilian court." Celine nodded grimly. "That's what they're counting on." She opened a second folder thicker than the first. Property records, inspection reports, and condemnation notices spilled across the dashboard. "This is the full pattern," she said. 17 homes in recent months. All the same process. First, the owner gets an offer to sell. Lowball price, but clean paperwork. When they refuse, a city inspector finds safety violations that require immediate attention. When the owner can't afford repairs, the property gets condemned for public health. Caleb studied the addresses. Every house was within 4 blocks of his mother's property. Then what? Emergency sale to Atlantic Shore Holdings. Always the same shell company. Always for exactly $10,000. Celine's voice turned bitter. "They're stealing $1 million properties for the price of a used car." And she pulled out another document. This one showed Atlantic Shore Holdings transferring the condemned properties to Harborgate Development for exactly $1 each. And Harborgate? Luxury condos, high-end retail. They're calling it the Maple Row Renaissance. Celine's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Guess what happens to families who can't afford $1,500 rent? Caleb felt his jaw clench. The gang in his yard had been foot soldiers. Behind them stood lawyers wearing expensive suits, city officials hiding behind bureaucratic language, and developers who turned human suffering into profit margins. How long have you known? I started noticing the pattern months ago. Falsified inspection reports, emergency condemnations that skipped normal procedures. I tried to bring it to my supervisor. Celine's laugh was cold. He told me to focus on legitimate violations and stop creating conspiracy theories. So you started investigating alone. I had to. Every family that got pushed out, I kept thinking about my grandmother. She lived on this block for decades. If someone had tried to steal her house... Celine shook her head. I couldn't just file reports and pretend I didn't see the pattern. Caleb respected that. Military or civilian, some fights chose you whether you wanted them or not. Captain Quinn appeared at the driver's side window and tapped the glass. Celine rolled it down. "Mr. Thorne, I need you to hear something," Quinn said. "This case is bigger than gang violence now. Document fraud, conspiracy, maybe federal charges if we can prove mail fraud or wire transfers across state lines. What do you need from me? Preserve every piece of evidence. Keep copies of everything. Stay visible and keep witnesses around you." Quinn's expression grew serious. "And be prepared for retaliation, not just physical, legal, political, social. They'll try to destroy your credibility before you can expose theirs." Caleb nodded. "I understand." "Good. I'll have patrol units check this block regularly, but I can't station officers here permanently. Watch yourself." Quinn walked back toward her cruiser. Caleb was about to suggest he and Celine go inside to see what could be salvaged from his mother's belongings when a white news van turned onto Maple Road. Channel 7 News, painted in bold letters on the side. The van parked directly across from the ruined house. A reporter jumped out, followed by a cameraman and a sound technician. Then a black sedan pulled up behind them. Councilman Victor Langford stepped out of the sedan. "This is bad," Celine muttered. Langford was exactly what Caleb had expected. 50s, silver hair, expensive suit, practiced smile. He moved toward the news crew like a man who lived for cameras. The reporter, a young woman with perfect makeup, positioned herself in front of Caleb's destroyed house. Langford stood beside her, his expression grave and concerned. This is Maria Santos with Channel 7 News reporting from Maple Row, where a violent confrontation this afternoon has raised serious questions about public safety and the challenges facing our returning veterans. Caleb felt his stomach drop. I'm joined now by Councilman Victor Langford, who has been working tirelessly to address the deteriorating conditions in this neighborhood. Councilman, what can you tell us about today's incident? Langford's voice was smooth, practiced, full of fake concern. Maria, this is exactly what we've been warning about. This neighborhood has become a magnet for criminal activity, drug dealing, and now violent confrontation. A resident with apparent military training attacked a crew of licensed contractors, who were performing legitimate, city-ordered safety work. Caleb's hands formed fists. Can you tell us about the individual involved? Caleb Thorne is a veteran who, frankly, appears to be struggling with the transition back to civilian life. We have reports of erratic behavior, aggressive confrontation with city employees, and now this explosion of violence against working men just trying to do their jobs. Celine was recording Langford's statement on her phone. "This is unbelievable. The city has tried to work with Mr. Thorne, but unfortunately, some of our veterans return home with trauma that manifests as anger and paranoia. We need to get him the help he needs while ensuring public safety." The reporter nodded sympathetically. "What steps is the city taking?" "We're expediting the condemnation process for this dangerous property. The structure is unsafe, and after today's violence, it's clear that allowing unstable individuals to occupy condemned buildings puts the entire community at risk." Caleb watched Langford lie with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. Every word was calculated to make Caleb sound dangerous and the gang sound like victims. "We're also reviewing Mr. Thorne's legal status regarding this property. There are questions about documentation, about whether he has legitimate claim to occupy this residence." The interview continued for another 2 minutes. Langford painted Caleb as an unhinged veteran who had attacked innocent workers, portrayed the destroyed house as a public hazard that needed immediate removal, and positioned himself as the reasonable public servant trying to balance compassion with community safety. When the news van finally pulled away, Caleb sat in silence for a long moment. Celine waited. Finally, Caleb spoke, his voice quiet, but still hard. "Then we clean it all." The house felt like a tomb in the darkness. Caleb swept his flashlight across the front room, the beam catching splintered wood, torn drywall, and scattered pieces of his mother's life. Every step crunched on broken glass or debris. "Power company says there was an emergency safety disconnect," Celine said, her own flashlight dancing across the walls. "Came through about an hour after the news and interview." Captain Quinn stood near the doorway, her light aimed toward the street. "I've got patrol units making regular passes, but they can't camp out here permanently." Caleb knelt beside an overturned bookshelf. His mother's Bible lay underneath, its pages torn, but the cover intact. He set it aside carefully, then continued searching through the wreckage. "Tell me about Harborgate renewal," he said, without looking up. Celine pulled a folder from her jacket. "They showed up more than a year ago. Clean corporate image, lots of talk about urban revitalization and bringing jobs to underserved communities. But every project they touch ends up being luxury condos that working families can't afford." She opened the folder and aimed her flashlight at the documents inside. "They don't buy properties directly. They use shell companies with names like Maple Development, LLC, and Community Investment Partners. Makes it harder to track the money." Caleb found his mother's jewelry box crushed under a piece of ceiling beam. Most of the contents were destroyed, but he salvaged a small silver cross she wore to church every Sunday. "What's Langford's connection?" Caleb asked. "His wife sits on Harborgate's Community Outreach Board," Captain Quinn said from the doorway. "Officially, that's just volunteer work. Unofficially, she gets paid $60,000 a year as a consultant." Caleb's flashlight caught something metallic wedged beneath a collapsed section of drywall. He pulled at the debris carefully, his hands finding the familiar shape of his mother's old sewing tin. The blue metal container was dented, but intact. He held it close, remembering how she would sit on the porch in the evenings mending clothes while telling him stories about his grandfather's service in Vietnam. "Crow made bail in 4 hours," Captain Quinn continued. "That takes serious money and connections. Most guys like him sit in county lockup for weeks before they see a judge." Celine nodded grimly. Someone made calls. Someone with influence. Caleb pried open the sewing tin. Inside were spools of thread, needles, buttons, and small scissors. But tucked beneath the thread was something he did not remember seeing before. A small digital recorder, no bigger than his thumb. "What's that?" Celine asked. Caleb held up the device. "I don't know. It's not mine." Before he could examine it further, Voices carried from the street, harsh laughter, and the sound of car doors slamming. Captain Quinn stepped onto the broken porch, her hand moving instinctively toward her service weapon. "We've got company." Through the glassless front window, Caleb saw headlights illuminating the yard. Harlan Crow emerged from a black pickup truck, followed by 6 men. Fewer than before, but they moved with more confidence. Crow carried a hammer and a sheet of paper. He walked straight to the front door, ignoring Captain Quinn's presence, and nailed the document to the wooden frame with loud, deliberate strikes. "Demolition notice," Crow called out, his voice carrying through the darkness. "Effective in 72 hours. City says this rat trap is coming down whether you're in it or not, soldier boy." Caleb stepped onto the porch, but Celine caught his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "That's exactly what he wants." Crow grinned in the flashlight beams. "You got 3 days to pack your dead mama's things and get gone. After that, the bulldozers finish what we started." One of his men spat toward the house. "Should have stayed overseas, hero. Nobody wants you here." Caleb felt the familiar cold focus settling over him. The same mental state that had kept him alive through a dozen combat deployments. But this was not a battlefield. This was his mother's front porch, and these men were trying to provoke him into making a mistake that would end up on tomorrow's news. He stayed silent. Crow waited for a reaction that never came. When Caleb did not take the bait, the gang leader's smile faltered slightly. 72 hours, Crow repeated, but his voice had less swagger now. He jerked his head toward the truck, and his men climbed back inside. As the taillights disappeared down Maple Row, Captain Quinn exhaled slowly. "You handled that right," she said. "He wanted you to swing." Caleb looked at the demolition notice, then at the sewing tin in his hands. "We need proof," he said quietly. "Something so strong that no judge, reporter, or politician can bury it." Celine nodded. "I've got more files at my office. Bank transfers, permit applications, inspection records going back years. If we can connect Harbor Gate to Langford and Crow, we might have something." Captain Quinn checked her watch. "I'll run background checks on everyone involved. See if there are other complaints, other patterns." Caleb slipped the digital recorder into his jacket pocket. Whatever was on that device, his mother had hidden it for a reason. "Dawn," he said, "your office. We build a case they can't tear down." The 3 of them stood in the darkness of the destroyed house, surrounded by the wreckage of a lifetime, planning to take on an enemy with money, lawyers, and political power. But for the first time since coming home, Caleb felt something other than grief. He felt purpose. The sunrise painted Celine's small office windows gold as Caleb pushed through the glass door, carrying a plastic bin filled with water-damaged documents he had salvaged from the house. Coffee stains marked the walls, and filing cabinets lined every available space. But the conference table in the center looked like a war room. Celine had already spread inspection reports, property transfers, and permit records across the scratched surface. Each document was marked with colored tabs and sticky notes. "Good morning," she said, not looking up from a stack of papers. "I've been here since before dawn." Caleb set the bin down and studied the organized chaos. His SEAL training kicked in automatically, treating the scattered evidence like intelligence gathered before a mission. Every successful operation started with understanding the terrain, the enemy, and the objective. "Show me the pattern," he said. Celine pointed to a large map of Maple Road taped to the wall. Red pins marked condemned houses. Blue pins showed properties already transferred to shell companies. Green pins indicated families who had sold voluntarily after pressure. 3 fronts, she explained. Harlan Crow and his gang provide muscle and intimidation. Councilman Victor Langford uses his political position to fast-track condemnations and block appeals. Harbor Gate Renewal stays hidden behind lawyers and shell companies, but they're the ones with the money. Caleb walked closer to the map. Nearly the entire neighborhood was covered in pins. "How many families?" he asked. 17 displaced in recent months. Your mother was number 18 on the list." Celine handed him a manila folder, thick with names, addresses, and dates. Each family's story followed the same script: pressure to sell, refusal, sudden inspection failures, condemnation notices, forced evacuation. The Garcia family fought the longest. Celine continued. "Maria Garcia called my office 6 times reporting harassment. Then Crow's men showed up with baseball bats and city paperwork. She signed the transfer the next day." Caleb studied the timeline. His mother had died months earlier, but the harassment had started months before that. "She never told me," he said quietly. "Would you have left your deployment?" "Yes. That's exactly why she didn't call." The office door chimed, and a woman in her mid-30s entered, carrying a leather messenger bag and a coffee cup. She had sharp eyes and moved with the confidence of someone used to asking uncomfortable questions. "You must be Caleb," she said, extending her hand. "Vivian Cross, Channel 7 Investigations." Caleb did not shake immediately. "Celine said you've been tracking Harbor Gate for months. They're connected to at least 12 similar projects across the state. But they're careful. Shell companies, political donations, legitimate-looking paperwork. I've had the financial trail, but I needed a human story with a credible witness. And you think that's me? I think you're a decorated veteran whose mother's house was destroyed by a gang working for corrupt politicians. That's a story people will believe." Caleb looked at Celine, then back at Vivian. "What do you need?" "Everything. Documents, testimony, on-the-record interviews. But I verify every claim before we go public. One mistake gives them ammunition to discredit all of us." Celine slid a sheet across the table. "Start with the Morales family. They were evicted months ago, and they're staying at the Riverside Motel on Highway 9. That afternoon, Caleb followed Vivian's rented sedan through downtown traffic to a run-down motel where paint peeled from the walls and broken concrete marked the parking spaces. Room 237 opened to reveal Carlos Morales, a man in his 50s with calloused hands and tired eyes. "Mr. Thorne!" Carlos looked nervous. "Celine said you might come by." Inside the cramped room, Carlos's wife Elena sat on one bed while their teenage daughter did homework on the other. Their entire life had been compressed into suitcases and garbage bags. Elena spoke first, her voice steady but angry. "They came at night. 3 men with bats, saying the house was condemned, and we had 24 hours to get out." "Did they show paperwork?" Caleb asked. "Yes, but it was wrong. Said we had structural damage we never had. Said the foundation was cracked, but we just had it inspected months earlier." Carlos pulled out a folder. "I kept everything. The original inspection report, the condemnation notice, the transfer papers. None of it makes sense." Caleb reviewed the documents while Vivian took notes. The condemnation was signed by the same inspector who had originally approved the house. The transfer went to a company called Riverside Holdings GLLC, which did not exist until the day before the paperwork was filed. "The worst part," Elena continued, "was what they said about our daughter. One of them looked right at her and said, 'Teenage girls could have accidents if their parents made trouble.'" Caleb felt the familiar cold settle over him. The same focused rage that had carried him through the worst missions overseas. "Can you identify the men?" he asked. The leader had a tattoo on his neck, snake wrapped around a $sign. He called himself Crow. Caleb closed the folder and stood up. Vivian was still writing, but he had heard enough. In the parking lot, Caleb stared at the motel's flickering neon sign, while Vivian caught up. "That's the same pattern as your mother's case," she said. "Exact same companies, same tactics, same threats." Caleb thought about his mother facing those same men alone, trying to protect a house that represented everything she had sacrificed for. She had never called him because she thought she could handle it herself. She had been wrong, but she had not been the first target, and she would not be the last. Caleb left the family's temporary motel room with renewed fury, realizing his mother was part of a larger hunt. The orange paper glowed like a warning beacon against Rosalind Thorne's broken front door. Caleb stopped on the sidewalk, staring at the demolition notice that had not been there that morning. The bold black letters seemed to shout from the page. Emergency structural condemnation. 72-hour notice. Celine ripped the notice free and scanned it with her flashlight. "This is garbage," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Look at this signature." Deputy Inspector Williams supposedly signed this afternoon, but Williams has been on medical leave for months. Vivian held up her phone, recording everything. "What's the date on the original inspection?" "Recently," Celine replied. "The same day Caleb was fighting Crow in this yard. They wrote the condemnation report before they even looked at the damage they caused." Caleb stepped closer to the doorframe, running his fingers along the splintered wood. The destruction was real enough. Broken hinges, cracked support beams, shattered windows. But it had been caused by crowbars and baseball bats, not structural failure. "They're trying to bury the evidence," he said quietly. "Tear down the house, and no one can prove what really happened here." His phone buzzed with a news alert. Councilman Langford's face filled the screen, standing in front of City Hall, with reporters crowding around him. "We have confirmed reports of escalating violence on Maple Row," Langford said, his voice smooth and practiced. "A veteran with documented anger issues attacked city workers and neighborhood residents. For public safety, we're expediting the removal of this dangerous structure." Vivian cursed under her breath. "He's spinning this fast, making you look like the threat instead of the victim." Caleb filmed the notice, the broken door, and the scattered debris in the yard. Every angle, every detail. The evidence would matter when this went to court. The low rumble of a diesel engine made them all turn. Harlan Crow's black pickup truck rolled slowly down Maple Row, windows down, music thumping. Crow leaned out the driver's window with that same ugly grin. "Tick, tick, tick," he called out, tapping his wrist like he was checking a watch. "Hope you find somewhere else to sleep, soldier boy." 2 other trucks followed behind him, filled with the same men Caleb had fought the day before. Bandages covered several faces, splints wrapped around wrists, but they looked confident again, like they knew something Caleb did not. Caleb did not respond. He just watched until the convoy disappeared around the corner. "I need supplies," he said, turning toward the hardware store 3 blocks away. "Tarps, lumber, basic tools. If I can stabilize the structure before the deadline." His card was declined. Caleb tried again, entering his PIN carefully. The machine beeped red. "Insufficient funds," the clerk said apologetically. "Sorry, man." Caleb checked his phone banking app. His account showed a balance of $11. A legal hold notice explained that pending litigation had frozen his assets, pending resolution of property disputes. "They're choking you out," Celine said when he explained. "No money, no utilities, no legal standing. They want you desperate and broke when the bulldozers arrive." Vivian was already typing on her phone. "I can run the story tomorrow morning, but I need something concrete linking Langford to Crow. Right now, it's just your word against a city councilman's." Caleb stared at his mother's house, dark windows staring back like empty eyes. 72 hours. 3 days to save everything his mother had worked for, everything she had died protecting. He walked through this broken front door, using his phone's flashlight to navigate around fallen plaster and overturned furniture. The floorboards creaked ominously under his weight, but they held. In what had been his mother's bedroom, Caleb found the sewing tin where he had left it half buried under chunks of drywall. His hands shook slightly as he opened the lid. Inside, beneath the spools of thread and packets of needles, was a folded piece of paper in Rosalind's careful handwriting. Caleb, if you're reading this, something happened to me, and you came home to find trouble. I knew this day might come. There are men who think poor people don't deserve to keep what they've earned. They think fear is stronger than love. Don't let this world make you hard in the wrong places. Be strong where it counts. Your mama raised a fighter, but more than that, she raised a protector. The house is just walls and wood, baby. What matters is making sure no other family goes through what we did. Make them answer for what they've done. Make them remember that some people don't back down. I love you always. Mama. Caleb read the note 3 times, his mother's voice echoing in the silence. Outside, Celine and Vivian waited on the porch, giving him space to grieve. But grief was a luxury he could not afford right now. The demolition notice gave him 72 hours to save the house. His mother's note gave him something more important. A mission that went beyond these walls, beyond this street, beyond his own pain. Reading his mother's words, Caleb decided he would not simply defend the house. He would expose the whole machine. The Harbor Gate Renewal Office occupied 3 floors of glass and steel downtown, where men in expensive suits made decisions about neighborhoods they had never lived in. Councilman Victor Langford paced behind the conference table like a caged animal, his polished exterior cracking under pressure. You told me this would be simple, Langford snapped at Harlan Crow, who slouched in his chair with fresh bruises on his face. 1 veteran, 1 house. Scare him off, and we finish the block. Crow shifted uncomfortably. Nobody said he was some kind of special forces psycho. He took down half my crew like we were children. Your crew? Langford's voice rose. 20 grown men with weapons and 1 homeowner embarrassed you on camera? Do you understand what this means for the project timeline? The conference room door opened, and a man in dark tactical clothing entered without knocking. Kane Ryder moved with the controlled precision of someone who had spent years in uniform, though his cold eyes held the bitterness of a career that had ended badly. His black hair was military short, his jaw sharp, and his handshake firm enough to send a message. Mr. Ryder, Langford said, relief flooding his voice. Thank you for coming on short notice. Ryder nodded toward Crow. This the one who got embarrassed? Watch your mouth, mercenary. Crow started to stand, but Ryder's stare dropped him back into his seat. Show me the footage, Ryder said simply. Langford slid a tablet across the table. Ryder watched the phone videos from the yard fight, his expression never changing. He studied Caleb's movements, his positioning, the way he controlled space and timing against multiple attackers. Run it again, Ryder said after the first viewing. This time, he focused on different details. How Caleb assessed threats, how he used terrain, how he disabled opponents with minimal effort. Ryder had seen enough combat to recognize the difference between a bar brawler and a professional operator. Well, Langford demanded, can you handle him? Ryder set down the tablet. This man is not a lucky homeowner. He's not reckless or desperate. He's a high-level tactical operator who's deliberately holding back. What does that mean? Crow asked. It means if he'd wanted to kill your men, they'd be dead. Ryder's voice carried no emotion. He could have snapped necks, crushed windpipes, turned those weapons against you. Instead, he humiliated you and walked away clean. Langford's face went pale. Are you saying we can't stop him? I'm saying you've been playing checkers against someone trained in chess. Ryder stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. But elite operators have weaknesses. They follow rules of engagement. They try to work within systems. They protect civilians. So how do we use that? Ryder turned back to face them. We don't attack him directly. We attack his reputation, his legal standing, his support network. We make him look dangerous and unstable. We isolate him from help. And if that doesn't work, then we make sure any physical confrontation happens where the cameras show him as the aggressor. Ryder's smile was thin and predatory. Elite soldiers are trained to win. They're not trained to lose gracefully on purpose. Across town, Caleb sat in Celine's cramped office, while Vivian interviewed families who had been forced from their homes. Each story followed the same pattern: inspection notices, condemnation orders, gang intimidation, then forced sales to shell companies. Mrs. Camila Reyes described how Crow's men had spray-painted threats on her garage. Mr. Otis Grant explained how city inspectors had found structural problems that had not existed the week before. Young couples talked about losing savings and moving in with relatives. Captain Quinn arrived during the third interview, her expression grim. "Caleb, we need to talk privately." They stepped into Celine's supply closet. Quinn spoke quietly. "My department has leaks. Someone's feeding information to Langford's office. I can't promise our communication stays secure." "What kind of information? Case files, arrest reports, evidence logs?" Quinn paused. "They know we're building something. They know you have allies now." Caleb nodded. "Then we move faster." When they returned to the main office, Celine was staring at her computer screen with her face gone white. "You need to see this." The screen showed financial records Vivian had obtained through public information requests, payment transfers between shell companies, contractor fees, consulting charges. "Look at this date." Celine pointed to a line item. "Payment to Pike Security Solutions for neighborhood consultation services, $50,000. Caleb leaned closer. "What's significant about that date?" Celine pulled up another document. "That's the day my office received your mother's formal complaint about harassment and illegal inspection threats. The complaint she filed asking for help." Vivian's fingers flew across her keyboard. "The complaint that disappeared from city records?" "The same one." Celine's voice was barely a whisper. "Harbor Gate paid Pike's company the exact same day my office lost the only official record of your mother asking for protection." The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Caleb felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. His mother had not died quietly. She had fought back, filed complaints, demanded help, and someone had made sure that help never came. Outside the office window, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the parking lot across the street. Kane Ryder adjusted his rearview mirror and settled in to watch. The Maple Row Community Center smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. Folding chairs formed a loose circle under harsh fluorescent lights. Caleb stood near the front, watching neighbors file in slowly. Some looked over their shoulders before entering. Others hurried past the windows like they did not want to be seen. Celine arranged papers on a card table while Vivian checked her recording equipment. Captain Quinn positioned herself near the back door, her uniform crisp and her expression alert. "Thank you for coming," Caleb began, when 15 people had gathered. His voice carried without strain. "Most of you know why we're here. Some of you lived it." Mrs. Reyes sat in the front row, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The Grant family occupied 3 chairs near the wall. Young couples Caleb did not recognize whispered to each other nervously. "Before we start," Caleb continued, "I want everyone to understand something. No one has to speak. No one has to stay. But if you choose to help, you're helping more than just me." He gestured to the wall, where Celine had taped a hand-drawn map of the neighborhood. Red X marks covered 8 properties. These houses were condemned in recent months. Every family received threats before the city found structural problems. Every inspection happened after owners refused to sell. A man in his 60s raised his hand. "What about the gang?" Crow said he'd burn down anyone who talked to reporters. "Harlan Crow is in this room's past," Caleb said simply. "We're building this room's future." Captain Quinn stepped forward. "I can't promise the system is perfect, but I can promise that every statement you give will be filed properly and protected legally. The law still works when people use it correctly." Vivian held up her small digital recorder. "Everything we capture today stays sealed until we have enough evidence to protect everyone at once. No one gets exposed alone." Caleb pulled out the folder of documents they had compiled. "Here's what we know. Harbor Gate Renewal wants this block. Councilman Langford helps them with permits and city pressure. Crow and his crew provide the intimidation." He opened to a page of financial records. "They pay for this service. $50,000 to Pike Security on the same day my mother's complaint disappeared from city records." Mrs. Reyes straightened in her chair. "Your mother came to my house weeks before she passed. She said someone was watching her property, taking pictures, asking neighbors questions about her health." "What kind of questions?" "Whether she had family coming to help, whether she could afford repairs, whether she'd be better off in a retirement home." Mrs. Reyes's voice grew stronger. "I told her to call the police. She said she tried, but they said watching wasn't illegal." A younger man near the back spoke up. "They came to us too, said the whole block was going to change whether we liked it or not. Said holdouts would regret being stubborn." Vivian leaned forward with her recorder. "Can you describe who said that?" "Tall white guy with a crew cut, military style. Not Crow. Someone else." Caleb and Captain Quinn exchanged glances. "Ryder. Mister." Grant cleared his throat. "I've got something you need to see." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through old videos. "My grandson was visiting when they came to pressure us. He filmed them from upstairs." The phone screen showed Crow's crew walking through the Grant backyard, pointing at the fence, the roof, the foundation. One man held what looked like a clipboard. Another carried a crowbar. "This was days before the city inspector showed up," Grant said. "Same inspector who found all those problems that weren't there the week before." Celine stood up quickly. "Can you send that to me right now?" "Already did, soon as I saw the meeting announced." A woman in the middle of the room raised her hand. "I work at the cellular store downtown. Harborgate's lawyer came in asking about phone records for this neighborhood. Wanted to know who was calling reporters or city offices." The room buzzed with angry murmurs. Caleb waited for quiet. "Anyone else?" For the next hour, the stories poured out. Security footage of strangers photographing houses, text messages with veiled threats, phone calls offering buyouts followed by inspection notices, property assessments that dropped mysteriously after owners refused to sell. Vivian's recorder captured every word. Celine copied inspection reports and compared them to actual property conditions. Captain Quinn helped residents understand how to file sworn statements that would hold up in court. Slowly, the room's energy shifted from fear to something harder. Resolve. An elderly woman near the door stood up. "My husband built our house decades ago. Worked 2 jobs to pay it off. These people think they can just take what doesn't belong to them." "They can't," Caleb said. "Not if we stand together." As the meeting ended, Caleb walked each family to their cars or homes. He checked corners, watched windows, made sure no one followed them. The community center's parking lot emptied slowly. Across the street, Kane Ryder lowered his camera and scrolled through the photos on his phone. Clear shots of every face that had entered the building. Timestamps, license plates. He selected the clearest images and sent them to Councilman Langford with a simple message. "Problem getting bigger. The newsroom at Channel 7 buzzed with controlled chaos as Vivian Cross reviewed her final draft one last time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment before she hit publish. Harborgate Renewal's Web of Corruption: How City Officials and Gang Violence Steal Homes from Working Families. The story went live early in the morning. By mid-morning, Vivian's phone would not stop ringing. Radio stations wanted interviews. Lawyers called offering services. Residents from other neighborhoods reported similar patterns of forced buyouts and mysterious condemnations. The city's online forums exploded with angry comments. Social media posts shared Vivian's article faster than she could track them. At mid-morning, protesters began gathering outside City Hall with handmade signs. "Langford must go. Stop stealing our homes. Justice for Maple Row." Inside her office, Captain Quinn studied the evidence Vivian had compiled alongside Celine's inspection reports and witness testimonies. The paper trail was solid. The testimony was credible. The photographs and videos were damning. She picked up her phone and called the district attorney's office. "We need warrants for Harlan Crow and 4 of his associates. Breaking and entering, destruction of private property, conspiracy to commit fraud." "Based on what evidence?" "A mountain of it. I'm sending it over now." By noon, Judge Amara Quinn had reviewed the emergency petition and granted a temporary restraining order against the demolition of 847 Maple Row. The orange notice was officially suspended, pending a full investigation. Caleb stood in front of his mother's damaged house reading the judge's order while neighbors gathered around him. Mrs. Cole from next door hugged his arm. Mr. Grant shook his hand firmly. "You did it, son," Grant said. "You actually did it." For the first time since coming home, Caleb allowed himself a small smile. The street felt different. People walked with their heads up instead of hurrying past with nervous glances. Celine pulled up in her city inspection car, grinning through the windshield. 3 more families got their demolition orders suspended. The judge wants a full audit of every Harborgate-connected property transfer in the last years. The crowd cheered. Vivian arrived with her camera operator, conducting interviews with residents who were finally willing to speak on record. The momentum felt unstoppable. "Councilman Langford's office has refused our requests for comment," Vivian reported into the camera. "But sources inside City Hall say his calendar has been cleared for emergency meetings with Harborgate executives." As afternoon turned to evening, Caleb felt something he had not experienced in months: hope. But Kane Ryder was not done. In the middle of the night, smoke alarms screamed through the city building that housed Celine's office. Fire trucks arrived to find the 3rd floor engulfed in flames. The arson was professional, hot enough to destroy paper records, but contained enough to avoid spreading to other floors. By the time firefighters extinguished the blaze, every inspection report, every copied document, every backup drive in Celine's office had been reduced to ash. Later that night, Vivian's news station server farm suffered what the tech team called catastrophic intrusion. Someone had injected corrupted data into her article's source files, making key documents appear fabricated. Even later, a video appeared on multiple social media platforms showing Caleb in his military-style jacket attacking 3 men near a construction site. The footage was grainy but convincing until someone looked closely enough to notice the timestamp was from the previous day when Caleb had been at the community center meeting with witnesses. But most people did not look that closely. Early the next morning, Councilman Langford stood in front of City Hall with the burned building smoking behind him. "This is what happens when we allow unstable individuals to terrorize our community. The evidence against Mr. Thorne is overwhelming. No one, veteran or not, is above the law." Captain Quinn's phone rang early. The mayor's office, the district attorney, the police chief all saying the same thing. Bring Caleb Thorne in before this gets worse. Not long after, Quinn knocked on the door of the motel where Caleb had spent the night after his utilities were cut. "I'm sorry, Caleb. You know this is garbage. But if I don't take you in, they'll send someone who won't be as careful with the process." Caleb nodded and held out his hands for the cuffs. "Do what you have to do, Captain." As the police transport rolled down Maple Row, Caleb looked through the reinforced window and saw an excavator approaching his mother's house despite the judge's restraining order. Ryder stood beside the massive machine, speaking into a radio. The operator climbed into the cab and fired up the diesel engine. Caleb pressed his face to the glass and watched the excavator's arm rise toward Rosalind Thorne's front porch. The police transport lurched to a stop as chaos exploded outside Rosalind Thorne's house. Caleb pressed his face against the reinforced window, his hands cuffed behind his back, helpless to do anything but watch his mother's legacy turn to dust. Selena Vargas sprinted across the street, her building inspector's badge bouncing on her chest, waving a folder above her head like a battle flag. "Stop! Stop right now! There's a court order!" The excavator operator looked down from his cab, diesel engine rumbling like a hungry beast. Ryder stepped between Celine and the machine, flanked by two men in black tactical gear. "Ma'am, you need to step back," Ryder called over the engine noise. "Emergency safety override was filed early this morning. Judge's order is superseded." "That's impossible!" Celine thrust the papers toward Ryder. "I checked the system 30 minutes ago. There was no override filed." Ryder smiled without warmth. Amazing how fast paperwork moves when public safety is at stake. Behind them, neighbors poured out of their houses. Mrs. Reyes from next door held her phone up, recording everything. The Martinez family stood on their porch, 3 generations watching in horror. Children pressed against windows while their parents pulled them back. The excavator's mechanical arm stretched toward the house like death itself, reaching for prey. Caleb yanked against the handcuffs, metal cutting into his wrists. The transport officer glanced back nervously. "Easy there, Thorne. Nothing you can do now." But Caleb was not listening. He was watching Celine face down Ryder's security team while the machine prepared to destroy everything his mother had sacrificed for. "Get away from that house!" someone screamed from across the street. "This is murder!" another voice shouted. The excavator's bucket bit into the front porch with a sound like bones breaking. Wood splintered. The porch posts snapped like twigs. The roof sagged, then collapsed inward with a thunderous crash. Caleb closed his eyes and heard his mother's voice from the sewing tin. "Don't let this world make you hard in the wrong places. Be strong where it counts." When he opened his eyes, the front room was gone. The kitchen wall buckled. The bedroom where he had grown up tilted at a sick angle before sliding into the growing pile of debris. Neighbors wept openly. Children cried. Reyes threw her hands up and turned away. Ryder spoke into his radio, calm as a man ordering coffee. "Phase 1 complete. Move to foundation clearing." Across the street, Harlan Crow leaned against his truck, arms crossed, grinning like he had won the lottery. He caught sight of Caleb in the transport window and raised his hand in a mocking wave. The transport pulled away just as Councilman Langford's black sedan arrived. Through the rear window, Caleb watched Langford step out, straighten his tie, and walk toward the waiting news cameras with the satisfaction of a man who had just eliminated his last obstacle. 20 minutes later, Caleb sat alone in interview room 3 at the police station, still cuffed to a metal table. The walls were beige concrete blocks. The air smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Captain Quinn entered with a folder and a cup of coffee she set in front of Caleb. "Cuffs are staying on for now. Policy." "I understand." Quinn sat across from him, her face grim. "The video is being analyzed by our tech unit. Preliminary review shows timestamp inconsistencies, but the public doesn't care about technical details. They see you in military gear attacking people. Caleb nodded slowly. How many people believe it? Too many. The mayor's office is getting calls demanding you be charged with assault, terrorist threats, and destruction of public property. Quinn opened the folder. Langford just gave another statement saying the demolition was necessary because you'd made the structure dangerous. Caleb stared at the table. For the first time since coming home, he looked genuinely broken. His shoulders slumped. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They took everything. Quinn leaned forward. Caleb, I know this looks bad, but we're going to figure this out. The video doesn't add up. There are too many holes in their story. Caleb did not respond immediately. He was studying the still frames from the fake video that Quinn had spread across the table. His eyes moved methodically across each image, the way he had been trained to analyze reconnaissance photos. Then he stopped. His head lifted slightly. Captain, in this frame here. Caleb nodded toward one of the photos. Look at the reflection in that truck's side mirror. Quinn leaned closer, squinting at the grainy image. In the curved surface of the mirror, barely visible, was a figure holding what looked like a camera or phone. That's Ryder, Caleb said quietly. He was running the camera. Caleb looked up at Quinn, and for the first time since watching his house fall, his eyes held something other than grief. Captain, I need you to retrieve something from evidence immediately. My mother's cracked photograph from the day this started. The frame is broken, but there's something inside it they don't know about. Captain Quinn returned 15 minutes later, carrying an evidence bag. She set it on the metal table and carefully removed the cracked photograph of Caleb in his dress uniform. The glass was spider-webbed from when it had hit the sidewalk that first day. The wooden frame had split along one corner. This is everything we recovered from the yard, Quinn said, settling back into her chair. What am I looking for? Caleb leaned forward as far as the cuffs allowed. The frame is handmade. My mother built it herself when I graduated basic training. She always hid things in places that looked broken. Quinn turned the frame over and examined the backing. The brown paper was torn in several places, but she could see something small and rectangular pressed against the inside. There's definitely something in here. She looked at Caleb. You sure about this? She started getting threatened months before she died. My mother was careful about everything. Quinn used a pen to carefully peel back the damaged paper backing. A small digital voice recorder, no bigger than a thumb drive, fell onto the table with a soft click. Caleb stared at it. She used those for grocery lists and appointment reminders. I bought her a pack of them years ago. Quinn picked up the device. It was scuffed, but appeared intact. A tiny red light blinked when she pressed the power button. It still has battery. She connected it to her laptop and opened the audio files. The screen showed 3 recordings, each dated months earlier. Quinn clicked on the first one. Rosalind Thorne's voice filled the small room, warm but tired. That councilman came by again, Victor Langford. He was polite at first, talking about neighborhood improvement and property values. Caleb's jaw tightened as he heard his mother's voice again. The recording continued. Then he got pushy. Said families who don't embrace progress get left behind. I told him this house isn't for sale. That's when his tone changed. A pause. Then Rosalind's voice again, more cautious now. He said people who fight city planning sometimes lose more than their homes. They lose their safety, their peace of mind. He said accidents happen to stubborn people. Quinn stopped the playback. That's a clear threat. Play the second one, Caleb said quietly. The next file contained more of Rosalind's voice, but this time she was not alone. In the background, 2 men were talking near her front porch. The first voice was Langford, speaking more openly than before. The Thorne woman is the last holdout on Maple Row. Once her house transfers, Harborgate can finalize the entire block purchase. A second voice, rougher and more direct, responded. My crew can handle the pressure. Boss knows how to make people uncomfortable without leaving marks. Caleb recognized that voice immediately. Ryder. Quinn rewound the section. Ryder's voice came through clearly. Payment needs to be cash, like before. $50,000 to boss, $25,000 to me for coordination. Once the old lady signs or disappears, the problem goes away. When Langford's response was ice cold. Just make sure it looks natural. We can't have martyrs. The room went completely silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Quinn stopped the recording and looked at Caleb. This proves conspiracy months before you came home. Langford, Ryder, and Crow were planning to force your mother out using threats and intimidation. What's on the third file? Quinn clicked play. This time, Rosalind's voice was shaking slightly. They sent men to walk through my yard today. They didn't say anything, just looked at the windows, the doors, like they were studying the house. One of them kicked over my flower pots. I called the police, but they said trespassing is hard to prove. Her voice steadied with resolve. Caleb, if something happens to me, if I'm not here when you come home, this recorder will tell you the truth. Don't let them steal what we built. Don't let them win. The recording ended. Caleb closed his eyes, his mother's final message hitting him harder than Ryder's fists ever could. When he opened them again, his expression had changed completely. The grief was still there, but it was now armored with cold determination. Before Quinn could respond, someone knocked on the interview room door. She opened it to find Celine Vargas standing in the hallway, her clothes smoky and her face streaked with soot, but very much alive. I need to speak with both of you immediately, Celine said. I have something they don't know about. Quinn gestured her inside. Celine sat down heavily, exhaustion evident in every movement. Ryder's people burned my office, but they made one critical mistake. Celine pulled a flash drive from her jacket pocket. They assumed I kept all my evidence in obvious places. Caleb leaned forward. What do you mean? I've been investigating Harborgate for months. I knew someone would try to destroy my files eventually, so I created a duplicate archive. With Celine's eyes showed the first hint of satisfaction Caleb had seen from her in days. I buried it inside the city's own permit database under a mislabeled environmental impact file. Ryder stole the decoy backup from my desk. The real evidence is still sitting on the city's own servers. Quinn was already reaching for her phone. What kind of evidence? Bank transfers between Harborgate shell companies and Pike's security firm. Email chains between Langford and Harborgate executives, planning the neighborhood seizures. Original inspection reports showing the condemned houses were structurally sound. And most importantly, the digital trail proving those property transfer signatures were forged using City Hall computers. Caleb felt something shift inside his chest. The grief was still there. The rage over his mother's house was still burning. But now it was joined by something else, hope. Quinn stood up and unlocked Caleb's handcuffs. Our forensics team just confirmed the attack video was fabricated. The metadata shows it was assembled from multiple sources and edited yesterday. You're being released immediately. As the metal restraints fell away, Caleb rubbed his wrists and looked at both women. They destroyed my mother's house. They think they won. Celine nodded grimly. Langford is giving another press conference in 2 hours, announcing the official start of Harborgate's luxury development project. Caleb stood slowly, his full height making the small room feel even more cramped. Then we show up with something worth recording. That afternoon, City Hall buzzed with the energy of what Councilman Victor Langford believed would be his greatest triumph. Television crews set up their equipment in the main conference room, while photographers positioned themselves for the perfect shots of progress and prosperity. Langford had spent the morning rehearsing his speech, polishing every word until it gleamed like the luxury development brochures spread across the presentation table. The room filled quickly with reporters, city officials, and invited guests from the business community. Langford smiled and shook hands, his confidence radiating through the space like heat from a furnace. Near the side exit, Harlan Crow stood with two of his remaining crew members, officially listed as private security consultants for the event. His presence sent a clear message to anyone who might consider disrupting the proceedings. Kane Ryder positioned himself along the back wall, where he could observe every entrance and exit. His eyes swept the crowd methodically, cataloging faces and watching for threats. The morning's victories had restored his professional pride. Caleb Thorne was discredited, the evidence was destroyed, and the neighborhood resistance had crumbled with their leader's arrest and release under suspicion. "Ladies and gentlemen," Langford began as the cameras rolled live, "today marks a transformative moment for our community. The Maple Row redevelopment project represents everything we stand for: safety, progress, and responsible urban renewal." He gestured toward a large display board showing architectural renderings of gleaming condominiums and manicured green spaces. The artist's vision bore no resemblance to the working-class neighborhood that currently existed. For too long, this area has struggled with aging infrastructure, unsafe housing conditions, and, unfortunately, recent incidents of violence that have made it clear immediate action was necessary. Langford's voice carried the practiced rhythm of a man who had learned to make destruction sound like salvation. The Harbor Gate Renewal Partnership will bring quality housing, increased property values, and economic opportunity to an area that has been neglected for decades. Sometimes progress requires difficult decisions, but the safety of our residents must come first. Crow shifted near the exit, his scarred knuckles visible as he clasped his hands behind his back. He had been looking forward to this moment, when the neighborhood that had humiliated him would finally disappear beneath concrete and steel. Ryder's radio crackled softly in his earpiece. His security team reported normal activity around the building's perimeter. The protesters from earlier in the week had apparently given up after Caleb's arrest and the destruction of the evidence. The condemnation orders for the remaining unsafe structures were issued following thorough inspections by qualified city personnel, Langford continued, his tone becoming more authoritative. "We cannot allow sentiment to override public safety concerns. The residents of this city deserve better than deteriorating housing stock maintained by absentee owners." A reporter near the front raised her hand. "Councilman, what about the allegations that some property transfers involved forged signatures?" Langford's smile never wavered. "Those claims have been thoroughly investigated and found to be without merit. Unfortunately, certain individuals have chosen to spread conspiracy theories rather than accept that progress sometimes requires change. We will not allow misinformation to derail projects that benefit our entire community." The main doors at the back of the room opened with a soft click that somehow carried through the entire space. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Camera operators turned their lenses toward the sound. Caleb Thorne stepped through the doorway wearing his navy dress uniform, the ribbons on his chest catching the television lights. Behind him walked Celine Vargas, carrying a briefcase, Vivian Cross with her recording equipment, Captain Amara Quinn in full police dress, and 6 residents from Maple Row, including the elderly man whose security footage had captured Crow's crew, destroying Rosalind's house. The room went completely silent. Langford's prepared remarks died in his throat as every camera in the room pivoted toward Caleb. The livestream audience watching from home suddenly saw a very different story than the one they had been told. Ryder straightened against the back wall, his hand moving instinctively toward his jacket before he remembered where he was. Crow took a step toward the side exit, then stopped as he noticed two uniformed officers had quietly positioned themselves outside. Caleb walked slowly down the center aisle, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He did not hurry, did not shout, did not show any of the instability Langford had spent days describing to the media. His presence commanded the room without requiring a single word. "Mr. Thorne," Langford said, recovering his composure with visible effort. "This is a private city function. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." Caleb stopped in front of the podium, his eyes meeting Langford's directly. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly to every microphone in the room. "You wanted cameras, Councilman," Caleb said quietly. "So let's give them something worth recording." Vivian stepped forward, her equipment already streaming live to thousands of viewers. "This is Vivian Cross, reporting from City Hall, where we're about to reveal evidence of systematic fraud in the Maple Row redevelopment project." Celine opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet connected to the room's projection system. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, what you're about to see comes directly from the city's own database." The screens around the room flickered, then displayed the first document, a bank transfer authorization moving $50,000 from Harborgate Renewal to Pike Security Services, dated the same day Rosalind Thorne's original complaint had disappeared from city records. Langford's confident smile began to crack at the edges as more documents appeared on the screens. Ryder moved along the back wall toward the exit, but Captain Quinn stepped into his path with two additional officers. The truth was finally getting its moment in front of the cameras, and there was nowhere left for anyone to run. The screens filled with more damning evidence. Forged inspection reports, falsified condemnation orders, payment records linking Harborgate to Pike Security Services, bank transfers that coincided perfectly with every forced property seizure on Maple Row. Langford grabbed the microphone, his polished politician's mask slipping. "These documents are fabricated. This is a desperate attempt by an unstable veteran to—" "The recordings have been verified by federal forensic analysis," Captain Quinn announced, stepping forward with a folder thick with warrants. "The digital signatures match voice analysis conducted by the FBI. The financial records come directly from bank subpoenas issued this morning." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras swung between the screens and Langford's increasingly panicked face. The live-stream audience watching from home saw the polished councilman's composure cracking in real time. On the screens, Rosalind Thorne's voice played through the room's sound system, clear and unmistakable. "Mr. Langford, you can't just take people's homes because you want the land." Then Langford's own voice responded, cold and threatening. "Mrs. Thorne, people who stand in the way of progress tend to lose more than just property. I'd hate to see something unfortunate happen to you or your son when he comes home." The recording continued, capturing Ryder's voice discussing payment schedules for clearing resistant homeowners, and Crow confirming that the old lady would not be a problem much longer. Langford stepped back from the podium, his face pale. "This is a setup. Those recordings were illegally obtained." "Actually," Celine said, projecting her voice across the room, "these recordings were made by Rosalind Thorne on her own property, documenting threats against her life. Perfectly legal under state law." That was when Crow made his move. The gang leader bolted toward the rear corridor, shoving aside a reporter and knocking over a camera tripod. His boots pounded against the marble as he sprinted for what he thought was an unguarded exit. He was wrong. Two officers stepped into his path at the corridor entrance. Crow tried to shoulder past them, but they were ready. Within seconds, he was face down on the floor, with his hands cuffed behind his back. "Let me go!" Crow screamed as they hauled him upright. "This is all lies! That psycho attacked us first!" But Ryder was already moving. The private security contractor had been edging along the back wall, watching the exits, calculating his options. When he saw Crow taken down, he made a desperate choice. Ryder launched himself across the room toward Caleb, not to escape, but to create chaos. He figured if he could provoke Caleb into losing control on camera, it might discredit everything they had just revealed. Ryder was fast and trained, throwing a sharp elbow toward Caleb's ribs while grabbing for his collar. But Caleb read the attack like a familiar page from a manual he had memorized years ago. Caleb sidestepped the initial strike, caught Ryder's wrist, and twisted his momentum against him. Ryder threw a knee toward Caleb's stomach, but Caleb deflected it with his forearm and swept Ryder's supporting leg. The fight was not wild or chaotic. Caleb moved with surgical precision, controlling distance and timing. Ryder tried to grab a folding chair, but Caleb trapped his arm and applied a joint lock that forced Ryder to drop it. "Stay down," Caleb said quietly, his voice carrying over the chaos. Ryder ignored the warning and swung wildly at Caleb's head. Caleb ducked, stepped inside Ryder's guard, and delivered a controlled strike to Ryder's solar plexus that dropped him to his knees, gasping. The entire confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. Ryder lay on the marble floor, exposed and humiliated, while cameras captured every moment. Caleb stood over him, breathing normally. His dress uniform still perfectly straight. "Nobody move!" Captain Quinn shouted, approaching Langford with handcuffs ready. "Victor Langford, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and intimidation of witnesses." Langford backed away from the podium, where minutes earlier he had planned to celebrate his victory. "You can't do this. I'm an elected official. I have immunity." "Not for felony crimes, you don't," Quinn said, snapping the cuffs around his wrists. Near the main entrance, 3 men in expensive suits tried to slip out quietly. They were Harbor Gate executives, who had been sitting in the front row, planning to take credit for the redevelopment project's announcement. Federal investigators stepped into their path, badges visible. "FBI?" one agent announced. "Nobody leaves until we've had a chance to speak with everyone." The corrupt machine was collapsing in real time, broadcast live to thousands of viewers who were finally seeing justice served. Caleb walked calmly to the evidence table, where Captain Quinn had placed Rosalind's small digital recorder. He picked it up, holding it gently in his palm, and watched as the entire network that had destroyed his mother's home was dragged away in handcuffs. Caleb stood on Maple Row as the sun painted the sky orange and pink, watching court-supervised crews load the final pieces of debris from where his mother's house once stood. The twisted metal, broken wood, and shattered glass that had been scattered across the lawn for months was finally being cleared away. The consequences had been swift and very public. Victor Langford was removed from office within a week of his arrest. The city council voted unanimously to strip him of his position after the recordings of his threats against Rosalind Thorne played on every local news station. Federal prosecutors indicted him on conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering charges. His bail was set so high that even his political connections could not help him. Harlan Crow and his entire crew faced organized crime charges under the RICO Act. The FBI discovered that their intimidation operation had targeted over 30 families across 3 neighborhoods. Crow was denied bail after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. Most of his men took plea deals rather than face trial. Kane Ryder lost his private security license and was charged with conspiracy, assault, and evidence tampering. The fake video he had produced was traced back to his company's equipment. Ryder's military records were reviewed, and several suspicious incidents from his past service came to light. He was facing federal charges that could put him away for decades. Harbor Gate Renewal's assets were frozen pending investigation. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit discovered shell companies, hidden accounts, and bribery payments stretching back years. 3 executives were arrested at their corporate headquarters. The company's predatory development practices were exposed in congressional hearings that Vivian Cross covered for national television. Judge Amara Quinn voided all the forged property transfers and ruled that families who had been illegally displaced could return to their land. The court ordered Harbor Gates seized funds to be used for rebuilding the damaged homes and compensating victims. Caleb could not get his original house back. The structure was too damaged to save, and too many memories had been destroyed along with the walls. But he won something more important: his mother's land, her honor, and justice for every family that had been terrorized. The legal victory felt complete, but the real satisfaction came from watching the neighborhood heal. Months later, the first rebuilt structure opened its doors. The Rosalind Thorne house stood where Caleb's childhood home had been, but it was larger and stronger. The building served as a legal aid center and veteran support office. Families facing illegal evictions could get free legal help. Veterans transitioning to civilian life could find counseling and job placement assistance. Selene Vargas managed the housing advocacy cases from an office on the first floor. She had been promoted within the city inspector's department after helping expose the corruption. But she chose to work part-time at the Rosalind Thorne house because she believed the community work was more important. Vivian Cross's investigative reporting on the Harborgate scandal won her a state journalism award and job offers from major newspapers. She stayed local, but expanded her coverage to housing fraud across the region. Her stories had prompted federal investigations in 4 other cities. Captain Amara Quinn used the evidence from the case to launch a department-wide investigation into corruption. 12 officers were suspended, and new protocols were established for handling property crimes. She was promoted to deputy chief and tasked with rebuilding trust between the police and the communities they served. The morning cleanup crew finished loading their trucks and drove away, leaving Caleb alone on the empty lot. The foundation had been cleared, the soil tested, and new construction would begin the following week. The Rosalind Thorne house would expand with a second building that would include affordable housing units for families who were still recovering from displacement. A young man walked up the street, heading to work at the nearby auto repair shop. He had lived on Maple Road during Crow's reign of terror and remembered the fear that had gripped the neighborhood. He stopped when he saw Caleb standing where the old house used to be. "Mr. Thorne," the young man said respectfully, "can I ask you something?" Caleb nodded. "Were you really as dangerous as they said? I mean, were you truly the most dangerous man they ever crossed?" Caleb looked at the empty lot, then at the rebuilt homes around him, then at the young man's face. People walked the street without lowering their eyes. Children played in yards without looking over their shoulders. The fear was gone. He smiled slightly. "No," Caleb said. "They were just used to people being afraid." I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you don't miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.